Jobs, the king of underground journalism. You're listening to the destroyers of fake news, Kristan T. Harris and Don Via Jr. on the Rundown Live. Feed your brain and grow healthy ideas. Tune into the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.
It's that time again. Time to relax, kick up your feet, grab your favorite beverage and tune in to the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.
Warning. Abnormally loud music may be contained within this broadcast, as well as information that may cause your brain to explode. So if you're not hip, or maybe you're just plain old, please find another broadcast that's suitable for you. RundownLive.com on KGRADB.com. I'm your host, Kristan T. Harris, riding shotgun. As always, right next to me is Don Vi Jr. Don Vi Jr., welcome to the broadcast. It's always a great program when we're together, and it should be interesting today as we got an interesting guest, one I've been wanting to get for a long time, and others have beat me to it. And it's my fault for not reaching out. Just saying, that's essentially what it comes down to. And one of our listeners recommended that we have him on when we were doing Futurism Week. I can't remember who the guest was, but somebody mentioned we were talking moon landing, right? Was the moon landing real or was it not real? I'm like, there's no way. Look at that. Remember, we're talking about it as like tinfoil on the moon lander, and maybe I just don't know what I was talking about at the time. So I was like, well, you got to have Bart Sibrel on. And I was like, who's that? And then I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the guy that Buzz Aldrin punched. He literally wound up and jabbed him because he was showing evidence that potentially was hurtful to the narrative that we landed on the moon, at least that we landed on the moon and recorded that video. So I'm really excited to bring him on. And while we do this broadcast today, we'll be actually airing his 47-minute documentary, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, prior to the interview. So you guys want to hang in there. But before we do that, we got to mention today's been an interesting day as I hosted none other than the American Journal on Alex Jones' InfoWars channel today. And we're viral, crazy viral. Like, I don't know if I've been this viral in a minute, bro. We've already accumulated almost 22,000 views on just one of the segments, that me and Ryan Gable did in particular in the morning on the all-seeing eye, the eclipse, and all that stuff. Did you catch the eclipse today?
I did not actually. I actually ended up falling asleep around the time it was happening, and because it was a partial eclipse in my area anyway. I know some friends of mine that I'm friends with on Facebook that live in generally the same vicinity as I do. Got some decent pictures of it, whatnots. I just, wasn't really that interested in it. I mean, I saw the one in 2017. I figure you see one, you see them all,
How dare you say something like that? Just kidding.
Yeah,
you've seen them all, right?
Yeah, I would have liked to do it because I saw that Derek Rose had posted on his Facebook page that him and his girl, they were at some of the pyramids down in Mexico because Derek's back home now. And so, they went to some of those, ancient Mayan pyramids to check it out. I would love to do something like that.
See, that's awesome. Cool. Right. With the serpent. We talked a lot about that on American Journal this morning, me and Ryan Gable, and, of course, Mark D'Antonio and Clyde Lewis joined us. It was a really action-packed show this morning. And if you guys want to check that out, band.video, if you take a look, these are the top videos on band.video. And if you look real closely, you'll notice that even though it's been many hours since they posted it 5 hours ago, we're the fourth most watched video of the day with almost, we'll refresh it. It says 22,100 views in the last 5 hours. That's pretty insane. That's crazy. That's more than Mike Adams at Natural News. And that's more than some of these really big names out there. Press for Truth, Dan Dix, and we could just go on and on with all these. And also the symbolism and science behind the solar eclipse. Mark D'Antonio is in the top 10. So 2 of the 3 segments I did today on InfoWars making the top viewed. And Band.videos got tons of views. Some of these videos have hundreds of thousands of views. And right now we're in the trending in the top 4 videos on Band.video all day. So that's pretty cool. And if you guys want to check it out, you just go band.video.
But it all boils down to this.
And,
we're bringing you hardcore information on the New World Order.
Like,
told you about lockdown, poison shots.
And he'll tell you that. But 22,000 views on the interview we did today already.
The video is currently playing, though, so it's playing over you talking.
Is it still playing?
No, it's paused now, but it was.
Yeah, for some reason, Alex Jones is yelling at me. He's like, oh, you gotta get those supplements.
You're like, Kristan, we gotta have you back on the show more. You're doing great numbers, kid.
We gotta get the supplements, oh, man. We need people to be healthy and nutritious. We gotta get those supplements. Survival Shield X3.
We got the documents.
Get the dreams, yeah.
Oh, I love it.
But anyways, the segment was called The All-Seeing Eye in the Eclipse, what the ancients knew about today's phenomena. They changed the name a little bit, but it's viral. Ryan Gable did a wonderful job. We talked about the all-seeing eye, and there's comments on it. So if you want to see Kristan T. Harris a little viral, maybe we'll republish this segment on our Rumble, which many of you guys are watching right now from. So don't go anywhere. Share the live link, punch the like button, and we are diving straight in to this documentary. Our guest today is Bart Sibrel. It'll be interesting. So share this because I tell you what, we're going to be there with you. Lacey says congrats in the chat. Thanks, Lacey. You rock. I appreciate everyone who tuned in this morning. And you know what? I have mad love for everybody out there. And when I say I mean everyone. Even if your name starts with the fruit, I don't care if you're pineapple or cherries or whatever. So that being said, let's go out there and get this started. So Bart Sibrel is an interesting figure. He's a moon landing skeptic, and we're going to ask him why today on today's broadcast. He put together this documentary in 2001. And we're going to go ahead and air it for you guys. For you guys listening on KGRA, you won't be able to watch it. But if you want to see it, you can go to the Rundown Live on KGRA's live channel, or you can go to rumble.com/the Rundown. You know what? Just skip all that. Just go to the rundownlive.com. I mean, definitely check out KGRADB.com. But definitely check out the rundownlive.com. We'll have it there. Just find our today's episode and our interview with Bart, and he'll be joining us in the second hour. But this documentary is 47 minutes, and you're going to watch it with us. How fun. Why? Yep. I've been talking all day. So this gives me a little bit of break before I do an interview again tonight, and I just got interviews lined up. It's crazy. People have me in demand today. We'll be back. Yeah. Check this out.
Since the beginning of recorded history, the human race has been at war. First with members of their own family, then their fellow countrymen, and finally nations at large. Yet perhaps the starting ground for all these conflicts lays somewhere deeper, within the very character of the human condition, in the dark, untouchable crevices of the human heart. It is said that the first iniquity of free will began even before the maiden pilgrimage from the embryo, preceding the very creation of the earth itself, in the forelife of souls in the heavenly realms. The dawn of warfare, some believe, was initiated by a fallen angel whose trespass against God was pride. In ancient Babylonia, in an age so long ago that the exact millennium remains in question, the Tower of Babel began construction. It was to be the single greatest achievement of the human race. A tower so tall that its summit would reach the heavens, and by it prove to the world that their race was superior. It would be God's irony that it would never be finished. Time passed, nations fell, a machine age emerged, and once again the ingenuity of the species which held dominion over all others unveiled what was at the time the most monumental accomplishment ever imagined, the largest machine yet constructed. An automation so mammoth and so revered, even before its first demonstration, that its only befitting name was Titanic. On April 10th, 1912, it set sail. It was boasted to be the ship that God himself could not sink. It would be God's irony that the very element that was meant to keep it afloat would cause it to sink. Water, frozen water, in the form of an iceberg. Not even one voyage did it complete. And then the next age embarked into the annals of human history, perhaps the last age, the space age. Competition for victor was unparalleled. Powerful nations spent billions in unabashed rivalry to outdo the other. The Soviet Union launched the first orbiting satellite, the first animal, the first man. They had logged 500% more hours in space than the United States. And in June of 1969, they launched an unmanned probe to the moon to retrieve the first soil sample from another world, just 1 month before Apollo 11. That's how close the race was. Had their unmanned probe not crash-landed into the lunar surface, the first moon rock brought back to Earth would have been by the Soviet Union. Richard Nixon, president at the time, had this to say about the latest work of the human hand. It is the greatest week since creation, the greatest event since the laying of the foundation of the seas, since the origin of the universe itself, since the design and formation of the delicate human eye through which all these things are perceived, was a flying machine with its 2 passengers landing on its closest celestial neighbor and returning from where it came. Perhaps again, God's irony lies somewhere within this great boast of humankind. The building of the tallest tower for the sole purpose of standing out among the races was never finished. The machine that was so great that it was said to be untouchable by even God never completed its first voyage. And finally, the crowning achievement of humankind, the greatest boast of the species, the event in human history most associated with pride in our own accomplishments, landing on the moon. 20 years later, and years behind schedule, the same space program couldn't put into Earth orbit a telescope with a lens that focused. And yet 2 decades earlier, a mission 100 times more complicated worked on its first occasion. With close scrutiny of the motives of the zealous Nixon administration, a critical examination of the entirely government-controlled press coverage, and newly discovered footage of the crew of Apollo 11 staging part of their mission, we wish to detail what may come to be the greatest government conspiracy of all time. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon.
Trip in my rocket ship. We'll have a lovely afternoon. Kiss the world goodbye, and away we'll fly. Destination moon. We'll travel fast as a light till we're out of sight. The earth will be like a toy balloon. What a thrill you'll get riding on my jet. A destination moon. We'll go up, 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 straight to the moon we two, high in the starry blue. I'll be out of this world with you, so away we'll steal in my space mobile, a supersonic, a honeymoon. Leave your cares below, pull the switch, let's go, a destination moon. We'll go up, 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 straight to the moon we two. We'll be high in the starry blue. I'll be out of this world with you, so away we'll steal in my jet mobile, a supersonic, a honeymoon. Leave your cares below, pull that switch, let's go. Destination, we're flying high up in the sky. Destination, destination moon.
Dr. von Braun, how would you say we stand in relation to the Russians, and do you think we can ever catch up?
I'm convinced that in the space field, the Russians are ahead of us, particularly in large weightlifting capability, and that at the moment, the problem is not so much to catch up, but first build up the working speed that they have already demonstrated. After we are running as fast as they do, there's still a considerable gap to close, and only the future will tell whether we'll manage to close that gap.
We cannot and will not ever get into this race as we should, so long as all of our objectives are short-term objectives. We've got to have no finite end to our objectives. The end of our objectives should be as far as we can see at any given time. But right now, we need a 10 to 12-year program that has as its ultimate goal the manned domination of space. And if we don't, we're going to be in trouble.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
We must assure our preeminence in the peaceful exploration of outer space, focusing on an expedition to the moon in this decade.
T-minus 60 seconds and counting. We passed T-minus 60. 55 seconds and counting. Neil Armstrong reported back when he received the good wishes. Thank you very much. We know it will be a good flight. Good luck and Godspeed. 40 seconds away from the Apollo 11 liftoff. All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still go with Apollo 11. 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
Unbeknownst to the citizenry, high above the Earth, beginning at an altitude of 1,000 miles and extending an additional 25,000 miles, lay lethal bands of radiation called the Van Allen radiation belts. Every space mission in history with humans on board, from both the United States and Soviet Union, from the first in 1961 to the present, has been well below this deadly radiation field. Mercury, Gemini, Soyuz, Skylab, the Space Shuttle, all maintained altitudes well below 1,000 miles. All except Apollo. The more experienced Soviets spent 100 hours in space for every 20 hours of the US. In order to survive the hour-and-a-half journey through this radiation field necessary to reach the moon and return, solid lead shielding between the astronauts and the exposure outside would be required. The mammoth Saturn V rocket used by Apollo was already 35 stories tall and weighed as much as a battleship. To add additional tonnage in the form of a lead barrier completely surrounding the crew members would have made it impossible for the vehicle to get off the ground. That is why the Soviets, though more advanced, only sent an unmanned probe to the moon. The Apollo spacecraft's narrowest shielding was less than 1/8 of an inch of light aluminum. In 1998, the Space Shuttle flew to an altitude of 350 miles, one of its highest altitudes ever, hundreds of miles below the beginning of a field of radiation that was so severe that the astronauts inside of their shielded spacecraft and inside of their shielded spacesuits saw flashes of light with their eyes shut that they described as shooting stars, due to radiation penetrating first the shuttle's shielding, then their spacesuit shielding, then their skulls, and finally the retinas of their closed eyes. As a result, CNN issued the following report noting NASA's unpredicted surprise. The radiation belt surrounding Earth may be more dangerous for spacewalking astronauts than previously believed. Scientists say the phenomena known as the Van Allen belts can spawn killer electrons when the Earth's magnetic field changes. These electrons that are being studied could have an important effect, not only on satellites, which has happened in the past, but could also affect the astronauts by creating large doses of radiation that could influence their health. The electrons can penetrate through various materials, including spacesuits, and can pass through, in fact, the walls of the space station, and can create high charges deep inside of these objects. President Kennedy, a man of political, not scientific background, set the irrevocable goal of landing a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s, just days after America's first astronaut had spent a mere 16 minutes in space, not even achieving a single orbit around the Earth.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
We take an additional risk by making it in full view of the world. But as shown by the feat of astronaut Shepard, this very risk enhances our stature when we are successful.
The technology necessary to launch the massive Saturn V rocket and an intercontinental ballistic missile is 95% similar. When the Soviet Union launched mankind's first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, there was grave concern that they had mastered space ahead of the United States and might use this advantage to launch a first nuclear strike from an orbit high above North America. When they also put the first animal in space, then the first man in space, then achieved the first spacewalk, the first crew of 3, and the first ever of 2 simultaneously orbiting spacecrafts, concern turned to fear and then horror as America watched their communist enemy achieve all these firsts with no hope in sight of ever catching up.
President, a member of Congress said today that he was tired of seeing the United States second to Russia in the space field. I suppose he speaks for a lot of others. What is the prospect that we will catch up with Russia and perhaps surpass Russia in this field?
However tired anybody may be, and no one is more tired than I am, it is a fact that it's going to take some time, and I think we have to recognize it. They secured these large boosters, which have led to their being first in Sputnik and led to their first putting their man in space. We are, I hope, going to be able to carry out our efforts with due regard to the problem of the life of the man involved this year. But we are behind.
If it was impossible to better the Soviets in the space race, which was really a race of technological armaments, what could be done? How could America offset the threat of superior weaponry? Throughout the history of rivalry and war, astute generals of lesser armies than their counterparts have used deceit and misinformation as a method to achieve victory. In World War II, for example, columns of inflatable tanks were placed at locations afar from Normandy to draw German forces away from the real location of invasion. The Star Wars missile defense program rigged tests to make it seem more advanced than it really was. That's the conclusion of the General Accounting Office. The aim was to fool the Soviet Union about US military readiness during the Cold War. Certainly, it was not possible to fool just the Soviets about US strategic capability in the 1960s, while somehow informing 200 million Americans of the truth secretly. In order for them to believe the United States had the capability to go to the moon, everyone would have to believe it. Furthermore, the pride of a nation was at stake, and the goal of a martyr, not to mention the growing unrest domestically of a government throwing tens of thousands of lives away in a foreign war riddled with contradiction and ambiguity. In addition, the Apollo program had already spent billions of dollars. If it failed to achieve its goal with such an investment, it would indeed be a large and bitter pill for the taxpayers to swallow. The cost of the program, whose sole goal was to be the first to plant a flag on the lifeless rock just outside the Earth, if adjusted for inflation to the 21st century, was $135 billion. With a profit margin of just 7%, this would be equal to over $9 billion profit going to the privileged contractors chosen by their friends at NASA. If the machinery was in fact only achieving Earth orbit, as other earlier missions had already done, then the completion and functionality of the other components would not have been as important, and even more profit would have been made. $135 billion could feed 2 million people for their entire lives. It could also buy 2 million two-bedroom houses. Yet how could such an undertaking be kept secret, and for such a long time? To the latter, one needs only to remember that an unsolved riddle 6 years older, the assassination of President Kennedy, still daunts the minds of the vast majority of Americans. As a parent of a conspiracy, as his assassin being assassinated himself, the truth of the matter has still escaped history. In keeping a secret of the magnitude of the Apollo missions being fraudulently created, one turns to the Manhattan Project for comparison. Surreptitiously building the first nuclear bomb during the early to mid-1940s involved 129,500 people over a 3-year period. Yet the secret did not get out. A quarter century later, the art and technology of espionage inevitably improved, narrowing dramatically the number of players in the know of a large clandestine operation. Just 1 year before the first mission to the moon, NASA launched the Tetra satellite, specifically designed to simulate flight data coming from the moon, so that the ground crews could rehearse the landing, much as the astronauts did in their own simulations. Had it not supposedly fallen back to Earth, all that would have been needed during the actual flight would be a repeat of one of these computer programs, with a few original variations, transmitted to the satellite for rebroadcast to Houston. Scores of computers and their deceived operators on the ground would then receive prearranged information, including the alleged location, altitude, and fuel consumption of the spacecraft, as if it were descending to the moon's surface. If the Soviets tried to find the actual location of an Apollo crew in the hundreds of thousands of miles surrounding the Earth and the moon, it would be tantamount to trying to find a rowboat in the Atlantic Ocean. The fact that the Apollo program was so departmentalized, with various construction and test sites around the country, meant that only a few people saw the whole picture. And for the first time ever, there was no independent press coverage of such an historical event. Whatever pictures and sound were distributed to the public were strictly controlled and previewed by the federal government. They were then disseminated unchecked until this hour. For who would realize that the unthinkable was not only possible, but absolutely true? And what of the photographs? What do they tell us? On 3 separate occasions, our office asked NASA's Public Relations Department for every single picture of an astronaut on the surface of the moon, just during the maiden voyage of Apollo 11. Many duplicates were sent. In all, fewer than 20 pictures were found, including first-hand investigation on site at the agency's vaulted archives. Quite surprising, considering the historical significance of the event. These very photographs are the same ones circulated year after year on anniversary commemorations. It is estimated that in just the first 60 minutes on the moon, motivated by the tenuous nature of the circumstances, many more exposures could have been expediently taken. Also surprising is the scarcity of photographs of the mission's chief pioneer, Neil Armstrong. The greatest achievement in human history, and of the man whose first step echoed around the world, dawning a new age of scientific enlightenment, there is only one full-body picture of him on the moon, besides this ghostly reflection. This one, taken by an automatic camera mounted on the side of the lunar module. Perhaps he feared liability should the whole conundrum later become unraveled. Perhaps he has forgotten that he attested to the authenticity of the event with his signature on this plaque engraved by the federal government. In fact, in the more than 30 years since the event, aside from NASA's initial press conference and the occasional brief anniversary remarks where few questions were permitted, he has never given one on-camera interview to anyone, ever. From an analytical standpoint, photographic anomalies have to be sought out with an understanding of lighting and shadows. The most straightforward is simple. When objects are lit solely by the sun, as all the scenes on the moon were said to be, after all, lighting equipment was not only impractical, it was unnecessary in bright sunlight, then all shadows, regardless of the landscape, will run parallel with one another and never intersect, as shown by this example. In these seldom seen photographs, obtained from a rarely used auxiliary NASA archival site, it is clear that these scenes were lit with artificial light. These shadows, which are cast at different angles, are evidence that a second light source is being used. In addition, the sun would not cause an isolated hotspot like this, only an artificial light would. Again, intersecting shadows and another hotspot. And again. And again. It is simply impossible for this picture to have been taken with sunlight on the moon. Here, the shadows are shown to be as black as pitch. And yet here, completely in a shadow, the astronaut is lit up like a Christmas tree. How can this be? Or this, on the shadow side of the lunar module. In this magnification of an Apollo photograph, a rock, very likely a papier-mâché prop because of the crease here, is categorized with the letter C. In later releases of the same picture, the letter is gone, probably airbrushed out. Here, a crosshair, which was burned directly into the image from the film plate, and thus should always appear on top of the objects in the photograph, appears behind the object in this scene, clearly revealing a composite of two pictures into one. Someone apparently forgot to create a burn crater underneath the lunar module's 10,000-pound thrust engine, despite the fact that during ground tests there was a real concern for the vehicle falling into the hole the engine created as it descended. Here is a Norman Rockwell depiction drawn just 2 years earlier based on the latest specifications and scientific data. In these enlargements, it looks as though the lunar module was simply placed there. Not even one speck of moon dust on the landing pod. As a result, all subsequent flights had to have the same discrepancy, which was explained away by the effect of no atmosphere. And what about stars? On the moon, with no atmosphere, they must have been quite a sight to behold. Yet there is seldom any mention of them, if ever, by any of the astronauts on any of the missions. Undoubtedly, creating a mural with all the constellations properly placed in the sky would have been virtually impossible to create accurately, much less realistically. A competent amateur astronomer would have been able to call attention to the slightest error in measurement. The answer? Not to talk about the stars. Ever. In their post-flight press conference, it was the only question to which Neil Armstrong responded with an absence of memory.
Oh gosh! Oh my gosh! Come on! Oh my God!
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
Years later, though, Michael Collins would remember seeing the elusive stars and wrote about them in Expeditions to the Moon. It seems his memory improved the older he got. Why don't stars appear in any of the photographs? Simply because the proper, mostly closed exposure setting for the camera's iris, set that way to compensate for the bright sunlight on the moon's surface, completely diminished the faintness of relatively distant specks of diminutive light. This answer is true. It does not, however, explain why they never took any pictures of the stars by themselves, with an exposure setting perfect for them. While they took 3 automobiles to the moon, they never took a photographic telescope. Had they done so, they would have been able to see farther into the universe than had ever before been realized. If they had taken a telescope and were not actually on the moon, They would have had to concoct undiscovered galaxies that might one day prove to be non-existent. The cost of the 3 moon rovers in 21st century currency? Nearly $60 million each, though they had fewer parts than a Jeep. Where was all this money going? Then there's the flag, blowing in the wind, at least twice, on the atmosphereless moon. We can only guess that most of the missions were staged inside for fear of possible aerial or satellite reconnaissance from an unfriendly nation. The backpacks, designed for 1/6 gravity, must have had the cooling systems removed to allow for movement without falling over. With very near and hot studio lighting, that left one hot astronaut inside. Assuming that it was the astronauts inside, after all, their faces were always covered. The necessary mammoth amounts of air conditioning were probably responsible for the air current. Here the editor cuts to a still shot of the flag, just as the effect becomes noticeable. Here it is unchecked. This rare clip, attained decades ago, was never re-released, with the inevitable increase in experience and scrutiny. To demonstrate 1/6 gravity, a bouncy, floaty feel to the astronauts' movements would be similarly achieved with relative simplicity. Slow motion. You are viewing the scenes as they aired more than 30 years ago. Now let's look at them with the speed doubled. It becomes discernible that they are, in fact, in Earth's gravity, and are no more leaving the ground than they would on Earth. It is clear from these rarely seen color television pictures that the crew of Apollo 11 brought a high-resolution color video camera with them on their mission, yet the only pictures broadcast live from the moon's surface were these from a low-definition black and white camera. In fact, the networks complained because in addition to this, they were forced to shoot the images, second generation, off of a projection TV of the technology of 30 years ago, and were not even allowed to take a direct feed, which further degraded the quality and clarity of the images. Perhaps this was precisely what NASA and the federal government had in mind. After all, it was a first, regardless of where they were. Better to open up their debut mission with fuzzy pictures and numerous blackouts, rather than show too much revealing detail of a false scene that was yet unproven. And finally, the element that seals their fate. Of all the footage of Apollo 11 requested from NASA over a 5-year period, one gem was discovered just before the completion of this documentary. An old reel received by mistake. It contains the raw or unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr., and Neil Armstrong, staging part of their mission for nearly an hour in living color, with exceptionally clear behind-the-scenes audio of conversations discussing the techniques used to achieve a disingenuous picture depicting the Earth at a distance, in order to falsely demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. It cannot be misconstrued that this staging was done for some other reason prior to the mission, for the reel itself is slated and dated July 18th, 19th, and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission, when they were said to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit. Furthermore, it is apparent they are in genuine zero gravity aboard the actual spacecraft, necessary to convince the mass media of their authenticity, just not any further than Earth orbit, as you will see. In this never-before-seen or heard footage, not only is the radio conversation between the astronauts and Houston Control audible, there is a secondary, private conversation taking place between the crew and a third confidential party, prompting the astronauts with what to say, when to speak, and how to effectively manipulate the camera to achieve the desired misleading effect. NASA claims that the Houston transmissions were the only ones taking place with the astronauts. Listen now as Houston Control initiates a conversation with the crew, only to find them too preoccupied with the behind-the-scenes trickery to respond. Moments pass and the oversight is picked up on by the clandestine third party, who quickly prompts them with talk. Immediately, Neil Armstrong speaks.
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over. Okay, Roger. We're mapping in on Earth.
Again, the illusion they are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance to demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private. Until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get the playback, we can sort of correlate what we were seeing. Thank you very much.
Here they discuss the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window, and there isn't any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from entering through the other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle. Subsequently, this take was never used. As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television audience, dated July 18, 1969, Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
See white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth.
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window. Here is the slate for the 19th of July, and the same shot of trickery on the 19th of July. And then the 20th, and the same misleading shot on the 20th. Later that evening, they were said to be walking on the moon. How can this be when they were in Earth orbit only 9 hours earlier, and the moon is some 3 days' journey away? Furthermore, if they genuinely went to the moon, why would they be faking any part of it? Why this trickery with the window? By faking being halfway to the moon, it becomes apparent that they did so because they could not even go halfway. It thus confirms that the stumbling block to their success was the lethal radiation of the Van Allen radiation belts. Since the same equipment was used on the subsequent missions in the 40 months that followed, none of them could have gone to the moon. They only increased their proficiency at staging them. When some TV viewers of the second manned mission to the moon telephoned the networks complaining that reruns of I Love Lucy were being interrupted, it became clear that for the taxpayers, once was enough. But it wasn't enough for the government and contractors. Billions of dollars of pure profit went with each return. How coincidental that the following mission would have the element of life and death jeopardy. Apollo 13. Now the public would take going to the moon more seriously and be reconnected with the drama. We now realize that perhaps the reason Neil Armstrong has never given an on-camera interview is because he doesn't want to lie anymore. What threats may have been made upon such honorable men or their families to possess their reluctant cooperation and later ill feelings towards perpetuating this still darkened hour in American history. NASA's highest-ranking official, James Webb, resigned without explanation just days before the first Apollo mission. Why, when he was on the threshold of achieving the greatest accomplishment of his career? All 3 Apollo 11 astronauts also resigned shortly after their return. On the 25th anniversary of the event in 1994, Neil Armstrong made a rare public appearance and held back tears as he spoke these brief cryptic remarks before the next generation of taxpayers as they toured the White House.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
He is that layer. Perhaps someday soon, with the uncovering of this footage and its meaning, the true patriots of America will rise up or come forward and free the citizens and themselves from the sin that so easily entangles and from a federal government that needs to have the gangrene cut off. Even if the government's destruction would come from the truth, then it is not worthy to stand, and its betterment would inevitably follow. All of us are mortal. All of us will die. Perhaps the seeking of a clear conscience before that hour will motivate the truth into the light. Perhaps as citizens, we should offer amnesty for this and other crimes of history, for facts from those involved, before the truth perishes with them. Why must we wait until the year 2017 to open the Kennedy assassination files? Perhaps they will not even be opened then, For the law that reluctantly stipulates their release says so with this clause, quote, with the exception of documents certified for continued postponement by the President. Whoever believes the citizens to be too immature for the truth are too immature for power. The truth will always set us free.
And that was quite a very powerful documentary. Kristan, you still have your microphone muted. But that it certainly gives people a lot to think about, for sure. I'm still one of those people as we've mentioned on this broadcast before, I do believe that the photographs and videos were faked, but that we did in some capacity go to the moon. So I'm interested to hear Bart's takes on it a little bit more, and that documentary certainly gave me a little bit more to think about, because there's some things that I did not know previously.
Well, and I'm sure there's a lot more information, because that documentary was made almost 25 years ago. I'm interested to hear what new stuff Bart has, because you know what? I'm going to tell you, my buddy Popeye, who does Rabbit Hole Radio for years and years and years, he used to do AM/FM radio for 10 years, amongst other things. He was a big advocate of the moon landing being photographed and hoaxed, and I was always like, I never really dove into it, never gave it much thought until recently. We had Alex Stein on the show. He talked a little bit about it. We've had many other great guests on the show, and Popeye's like, you gotta check it out. We never made it to the moon, bro. And I'm like, I don't know, Popeye. And he's like, yeah, I'm telling you that the original moon photographs are fake. There's no way. Look at that space lander. It looks like it's wrapped in tinfoil. And now that I look at it, I'm like, yeah, it is wrapped kind of like in tinfoil. It looks like zip ties and all this other weird stuff. But that being said, without further ado, we have a very special guest joining us. The director of the documentary we just saw is joining us. Bart Sibrel is award-winning filmmaker, writer, and investigative journalist who has been producing television programs, documentaries, music videos, TV commercials, and stage plays for over 40 years, starting at the age 18, hosting his own television talk show. Sibrel has owned 5 production companies, been employed by 2 of the 3 major networks, worked as a television news reporter, and produced videos shown at ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, TLC, USA, and BET. Sibrel has also appeared on as a seasoned actor. Welcome to the broadcast, Bart. Man, it's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm excited to talk to you. There's so many questions I have.
Well, yes, I'll start with the most important one. My favorite color is magenta.
I knew it. That's exactly what I was going to go for. Why magenta?
It used to be blue, but I think magenta is the God color. Whenever there's something mysterious in movies or God, it's always magenta for some reason.
Well, it's interesting. The government, not just the government, but corporations invest a lot of money in understanding the impact of color on people. That's why McDonald's colors are red and yellow. It's because it naturally makes you hungry, and they spent a lot of money finding out how the programming works. In fact, that's why they call them TV programs, is they program individuals and kind of a form of social engineering. I know there was a book I have on my bookshelf I haven't gotten to, and it was like 4 reasons to throw away your TV or something like that, and had to deal with all the programming and the subliminal messaging and how they subliminally instruct us to go buy things like popcorn.
Well, I don't think red and yellow make you hungry. I think red and yellow makes garbage seem appetizing.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, facts. I guess so. McDonald's, red and yellow. Chick-fil-A, red and yellow. Burger King. Yeah, I see your point. You're right. Can't argue with that one. So, but that being said, I have to start out by asking you, how did you end up going down this rabbit hole? What made you question the official moon landing? Because there's just, it sounds like just like 9/11, we were programmed with repeated videos of the moon landing over and over. And I remember when 9/11 happened, that's all we saw on TV all day. Just 9/11, just building fall, building fall, building fall. It sounds like the moon landing is a very similar situation where they repeatedly program the audience to see the moon landing happen across America? Of course, it'd be a great feat.
Well, I grew up believing that they were real like everybody else, and even more so. My father was in the Air Force, and we know now that the first moon landing was filmed at an Air Force base. I was just 4 years old, asleep in bed. It was past my bedtime. But afterwards, my father got a VIP package of color prints from Apollo 11. And wherever he moved every 2 years, it was like a shrine in each bedroom from house to house to house. So from the age of 4 to 14, if I saw them only once a day, that's 3,650 times. And I probably saw them 3 times a day. So I saw these pictures over 10,000 times, almost worshiping the glorious, mesmerizing moon landings. And then when I was 14, I saw a guest on a talk show who worked for NASA for 6 years with the second highest security clearance next to von Braun himself. And he said he read a memo from von Braun to the Pentagon warning them that the odds of going to the moon the first time successfully were 1 in 10,000. Virtually assured you're going to kill the crew attempting to do it. And that, like a good poker player with a crappy hand, they bluffed. And Don there has picked up on the fact, and it's true, that the pictures were falsified. I'm a filmmaker, so my job is to make fake scenes look real. And not only can I tell you that they were shot with electrical lighting, I can tell you what kind of light. If you go to Sibrel.com, on the homepage is a 3-minute video where we show one photograph that proves legally and scientifically that the moon missions were falsified. If you go out and on a sunny day in your parking lot or front yard, no clouds, look at 2 trees, 2 telephone poles, 2 people, and you'll see that the shadows are always running parallel in sunlight because the sun's about 1 million times bigger in volume than the Earth and 93 million miles away. And so it's going to cast shadows in the entire same direction on a continent or moon or whatever. We have a picture from the alleged last mission to the moon of shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart. Go to a courtroom, take everybody out, the jury out to the parking lot, have 2 people stand beside one another. Their shadows will run parallel and never intersect. And then come into the courtroom, which generally has no windows, turn off all the lights, bring in one electrical light, position one person in front of it and one person to the right of it, and you'll see the shadows intersect at 90 degrees. You've just proven in a court of law that the pictures that they claimed were lit on the moon with sunlight were in fact lit with electrical light, which means they're on Earth. Now, the next step that we unfortunately have to face is, if they really went to the moon, then we'd see real pictures of the moon. They wouldn't risk releasing pictures that could be proven to be fake. They wouldn't take that chance if they could really go. Unfortunately, like with this little adventure we went through for the last 3 years, they don't care why you believe there's this illness circulating the world, as long as you believe it. If you believe it comes from an animal, good for you, as long as you think it's real. If you believe it came from a medical facility, which I believe is a red herring also for the alternative media, as long as you believe that it's real. And the same thing, if you think they're communing with aliens on the other side of the moon with secret crews, as long as you think we went. They wouldn't risk faking pictures if they really went. And what we have, what you just showed, is them faking being halfway to the moon, which means they cannot go halfway. Here we are 54 years later, and the latest mission to the moon, which was 100% behind schedule, right? They said in 2014, they will have people orbiting the moon in 2018. Double the time. They can't even have people orbit the moon. They had mannequins. Why? Because people would die. How is it we can play golf and drive cars on the moon with 1960s technology, and 50 years later, we can only send mannequins to orbit the moon? So the first proof is intersecting shadows. The second proof you just showed of them using a 1-foot model to pretend to be halfway to the moon, proving they cannot leave Earth orbit. And here we are 50 years later, they still cannot leave Earth orbit. That's why there's mannequins leaving Earth orbit. Then we have the third proof of the fact that you can't have greater technology in the past and in the future, because today, with 5 decades better technology, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. So what they're really claiming is, in 1969, when all of NASA's computers combined had 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, They sent astronauts 1,000 times farther ahead of schedule on the first attempt than they can do 50 years later with 5 decades better technology. So they're claiming they had 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 than today. That's a historic and scientific impossibility. That proves it. And then if you go to Sibrel.com, my book discloses an eyewitness who saw them film Apollo 11 at Cannon Air Force Base. You asked, what is the new revelations? That's it. We have an eyewitness as he was dying, fearing the judgment of God. The first thing out of his mouth wasn't, I helped fake the moon landing. The first thing out of his mouth was, he killed somebody. He's been carrying this guilt for his whole life. He's hours away from dying. He says, I'm a murderer. His son calls the military police because he says he killed a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base. The military police come in. They say, who do you kill? He mentions their name. He said, why did you do it? He said, well, we eyewitnessed the moon landing fraud being filmed June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968 at Cannon Air Force Base, where he was chief of security and stood beside President Johnson, who was there out of curiosity the first of 3 days of filming. And he said his coworker thought it was morally wrong. He was going to tell a reporter, and he killed them to cover it up. You don't make that stuff up as you're dying. So we have 4 proofs: an eyewitness, a 1-foot model of the Earth, faking being halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight, shadows intersecting that can only happen with electrical light, and the fact you can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. People have to face the facts. And Don, you're obviously a very smart guy. You quickly picked up on the fact the pictures are fake. The next part that you need to leap beyond, it's no offense, we're all people, emotions. Right? I'm a child emotionally, let me just be honest. When my wife and I have a fight, I'm crushed, you know? And when I saw that footage and it dawned on me, they really did fake the moon landing, it just broke my heart. I'm like, oh my gosh, how sad of a world is this? We have to face the facts. The reason why they faked it wasn't aliens, wasn't secret technology. It's because they're arrogant, thieving, murderous bastards. Why did President Clinton say that he had the affair once he finally got caught after 15 times saying he didn't? He said, because I could, meaning because he could get away with it. They didn't have to fake the moon landing. They could have just said, hey, we're going to need more time. In fact, NASA has never kept a schedule in their entire history, except the most complicated one of all time, right? And so why did they fake it? Because they're arrogant, because they could get away with it. And these people are still in power, right? The Robert Kennedy Jr., I'm almost finished with my rant, and thank you for the time. Robert Kennedy Jr., okay, he has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone. He says his uncle was killed by the CIA. I think that's election interference, and I don't think it's coming from the Russians. It's coming from the corrupt federal government, because John Kennedy was going to clean house and get corruption, and the corruption got him beforehand, right? Yep. Then Robert McNamara, who was defense secretary during the Vietnam War, which 90% of Americans were against. Just like on January 6, 1941, 90% of Americans were against entering World War II. The next day after Pearl Harbor, 90% wanted to get even. So Robert McNamara said before he died, he and the CIA got together. We need some sort of emotional thing to get the public behind it. They invented out of thin air a fake attack of a North Vietnamese ship on an American ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. Congress passed a law that started that war based on an entire fabrication by the CIA. So if they're willing to kill their own president, if they're willing to kill 58,220 of their own soldiers without reason, I don't think they have a problem faking an image of the television of the moon, you see? So that's my rant. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, a $60 million space rover, though. Like,
yeah, well, even more now. I think inflation since the film came out, about $100 million.
$100 million space rover. Like, where did the money go, Bart? Like, do we have any idea? Was it used and funneled towards the military-industrial complex? Is the money used towards black ops? Like, so the thought process.
Well, actually, it cost $240, and the rest they blew in Vegas.
That's probably what really happened.
It was a 3-day weekend. It took him 3 days, not 2.
So it's interesting. As an investigative journalist myself, I spent a week with Judith Baker, Lee Harvey Oswald's alleged lover, as well as St. John Hunt. St. John Hunt is Howard Hunt's kid. I don't know if you know Howard Hunt. He was former director of intelligence of the CIA. And St. John Hunt claims his father, on a deathbed, he recorded him admitting that the CIA was responsible for the assassination of JFK as well. So that's all fascinating stuff. And that's a story I've gotten to tell because I spent time with him about 10 years ago during I think it was the 50th anniversary of the assassination of JFK. And Judith Baker alleges to be Lee Harvey Oswald's former lover. There's a lot of, like, the verdict is out on that one, but she has evidence that she did work with them, pay stubs and photographs and other interesting stuff. She wrote a book called Me and Harvey Lee that was very popular for many years. And I actually spent time with her, as well as a guy named Jim Mars, who's a very interesting individual before he passed. And so when it comes to the JFK thing, that's another thing that I'm not surprised that our government would be responsible for. They claim it was under the guise of national security. And now I think once all the players are dead, the people are dead that are involved, we're going to find out more about that. But, when it comes to the moon landing, so there's a couple of things. First of all, you know how to take a hit. You definitely got punched by, was it Buzz Aldrin, I believe? By asking questions. So let's take me back. So the process in the last 25 years, what else have you uncovered? And what are some other things that have led you to believe that the space landing was fake? Because I'm completely bought into the idea that the imagery was fake, like you mentioned, that they had a special operation, that they went ahead and photographed and filmed video, the shadows and the 90-degree shadows, all those different things are interesting. I know that there's some pictures going around of Buzz in Masonic garb in his spacesuit. Whether or not that was true or not, that was out there as well. As there's so much misinformation out there dealing with the moon landing. So I guess somebody that's done a lot of research on this, it's great to ask you about all these things. There's a lot to unpack here, but there's been some, I would say it seems like some progress since this documentary has come out, has there not?
Well, yeah, Kristan. First of all, we have to see that it's not fascinating that Kennedy was killed by the CIA. It's dangerous and deadly for our children. That's like saying it's fascinating a child gets raped every day in our neighborhood. That's fascinating. No, it's dangerous. And it's not a theory they faked the moon landing. It's a fact. We have an eyewitness. We have incontrovertible proof. People don't want to accept it. It's Santa Claus for adults or whatever. They don't want to face the reality that our technology is limited. It can only do so much. And one of the chapters in my book, you asked about new information. Not only do we have an eyewitness who saw them filming the fake moon landing, he stood beside President Johnson. And as the chief of security, President Johnson gave him a list of 15 people who were allowed in to observe. Neil Armstrong was one of the people, wasn't even in the spacesuit in the TV footage. Buzz Aldrin was on the list. Von Braun was on the list. Van Allen was on the list. And some people I never heard of, including one guy named Robert Emenegger, who spent his whole life saying the moon landings are real and UFOs and aliens are real. And he worked for the CIA. So they want us to believe lies. Therefore, I say that aliens and UFOs are about as real as the moon landings. For some reason, they want us to believe in that. Von Braun's closest friend said that they were going to fake an alien invasion. And the top two UFO researchers agree that UFOs are real, which they are. However, they're not from outer space, they're from Earth. And they're demonic. Now, another thing that came out, mind you, my film was financed by someone who builds rockets for NASA, multimillionaire, who wants to remain anonymous so that his stock doesn't go down any more than it has already. And he gave me $1 million to expose this because he thought it was morally wrong. And we did. And in the 7-year project, we uncovered footage of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes with the third track of audio of the CIA prompting them to fake a 4-second radio delay. I mean, it's unbelievable. 2 NBC news directors agree it proves they did not go to the moon. NBC was going to broadcast it nationwide and break the story until they got a threatening call from the United States government. The dead man who confessed that he participated in the filming of the moon landing at Cannon Air Force Base less than 2 years ago, and I'm confirming this information for my book, which I read in audio, Kindle, or print at Sibrel.com. After he gave me this information. 2 government agents show up at his house less than 2 years ago and threatened to kill him and his family if he ever talks about the moon landing fraud again. They're very concerned about this, even though it killed fewer people than even the JFK witness list and certainly 9/11, which 3,000 engineers are risking their reputation saying it's mechanically impossible for a pinhole airplane to go in and out and cause a collapse. Look at Oklahoma City bombing. Half the building blown away. The grid still stands. So a pinhole going in and out isn't going to cause its collapse, right? So this is different. You see, whoever killed JFK, he's still dead. It's just a matter of who did it and why. Same with 9/11. All those people are still dead. You can change the hat on who did it and why. This is a positive lie. And my friend Don here still wants to believe that you can go to the moon when the pictures are fake because they didn't go. It's as simple as that. I wish, Star Trek and all that was real. It's not. We're conditioned to want to believe in aliens and all, because it is fascinating, just like I was mesmerized by these pictures. Now, we had information with the millionaire backing us. We bought documentation from Apollo widows, $10,000 for one piece of paperwork, okay? And we had information that we did not put in the film because the relatives of deceased astronauts were pursuing their own investigations. Now that they have died, the relatives, I can put that in the book. I interviewed the widow of the man who is going to be the first man to walk on the moon. Her name is Betty Grissom. Her husband was Virgil Gus Grissom. He was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. And he could not understand how none of the equipment worked. And as soon as a department became organized, they broke up everybody, brought in new people so that no one would see the full picture. In fact, Eugene Krantz, who I've spoken to, says that a person in the command center, in the heart of NASA, can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and a quote real flight. It's all a bunch of numbers going by on a screen. So if they can't tell a difference, I don't think we can, if there's only 3 eyewitnesses once they go up, you see. Well, she told me, I interviewed her, the widow of the man who was going to be first man on the moon. She said he was preparing Senate and Congress reports complaining that they were a decade away, not months away from going to the moon. He couldn't understand how they could possibly think they could go to the moon when they couldn't even get a wired intercom to work between 2 buildings. They have a pole with a little bag on it to pick up a lunar sample. The bag on the end of the pole falls off. They can't get that to work, much less oxygen and spacesuits and all this. No one would fix anything because the higher-ups knew they weren't going to go and hadn't told the astronauts at that time. Days before the guy died, he, in his fury, has a press conference without permission. And he brings a bunch of reporters to the pinnacle top of the rocket, where he affixed a lemon the size of a grapefruit, calling the thing a piece of junk in the national news. Then his wife told me, mind you, I interviewed her for 4 hours, and his son, who's a 747 pilot, for 3 hours. She said on January 26, 1967, he came home from work and said the following: "Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today inspecting the equipment. I wonder why," right after he held that press conference and complained the equipment was a piece of junk. The very next day, he's dead from faulty equipment. She told me, not my opinion, he was absolutely murdered by the CIA because he wouldn't cooperate with fraud at NASA. Okay, so last part of my rant, number 2, our first document of this country is not the Constitution. It's the Declaration of Independence, which says when any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Now, what's the first one? Life. Our government is not only taking 1/3 of our income to deceive us about moon landings and who knows what else, they're using that money to pay the salaries of CIA agents to kill our neighbors and friends and family members who are trying to expose their crime. Our government is killing their own people to cover up their crimes. That's not interesting. That's dangerous. This something has to be done. And the great thing about the moon landing fraud Like I said, different than JFK, different than 9/11. It's a positive lie. And when you take away that candy and give people a piece of manure, one NBC News director refused to broadcast it. He said this will cause a civil war. It'll enrage the public. And I'm like, okay, let me get this right. You're not going to broadcast it because you're afraid that if the public finds out how corrupt the federal government is, it'll bring down the corrupt federal government.
Right.
You know, and you saw in the last part of my film, which was made before 2017, I said then in 2017, they're not going to release the JFK files. The narrator said so. Because you know what the law says? It's so ridiculous. The law was only passed because of Oliver Stone's film. Can you believe that? And then the law says we will release the JFK files in 2017 unless at that time we change our mind. I mean, why even bother having a law at all? That's like saying I promise not to punch you unless I decide to change my mind. You know, what's the point? And so we have to see this is so dangerous. And the moon landing fraud is like the linchpin, the finger out of the dike. One NBC News director didn't want to go down in history as causing the federal government to collapse, which he thought would happen if the truth came out. So we have this odd topic. You could say the poster child of conspiracy theories. It's not a theory. They really did fake the moon landing. And if the public finds out, it will bring them down. That's why if you do a search, you know, moon landing fraud, you get 1,000 videos about how no, we really went. I mean, come on. If they really went to the moon, then anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. Why would they spend thousands of hours on thousands of videos to reassure people, right? If I'm going around saying Mickey Mouse was the first president, you think there'd be 1,000 videos to reassure people it was George Washington?
Of course.
And as you know from Astronauts Gone Wild, when I showed Edgar Mitchell, who spent his whole life saying UFOs are real and the moon landings are real, by the way, when I showed him the fake footage, he turned beet red, kicked me from behind, cursed at me. And in the commotion, we leave a wireless microphone on him. And in the commotion, my camera operator forgot to hit stop record. So while the camera's in the back seat of the rental car, it's still recording the audio privately inside their house with the door closed, where they are discussing calling the CIA to have me killed, word for word. Now, if I'm some silly person who thinks the moon landings are fake, why would the CIA care if they really went? You see? That's indirect proof. And so is the fact that they destroyed all the original videos, all the original telemetry, all the original diagrams, which you would never do if you spent $200 billion investing in that technology. But that's exactly what you would do if you perpetrated a fraud. So I'm done with my second rant. Back to you guys.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I remember reading in the news maybe 10 years ago, we were reporting on it when we were doing the broadcast, that NASA accidentally recorded over the original moon landing
Right.
tapes. It was like, oh, how convenient.
Well, yeah, because they wanted to get a repeat of Seinfeld. This is a good episode about the Nazi suit guy. They didn't want to miss that one. Neil Armstrong, who cares?
They got the old Doctor Who's, though. People keep finding those. But for listeners out there, because there's a lot to unpack in your rant, the operation that Werner von Braun was talking about was called, I believe, Project Bluebeam, where they wanted to fake a UFO invasion to establish a new world order, which is a cliche term that we're hearing all across, social media, not just social media and politics. In Ukraine, they're fighting for the new world order. Allegedly, Joe Biden's talking about a new world order, and before him, it was Clinton and Obama and everyone, Bush, all of them. They all talk new world order, and it's interesting. It's all fascinating. And you mentioned Richard Gage. I got to plug my buddy Richard Gage. He's a good friend of mine. Check out Architects and Engineers for 9/11. Bart was so nice to mention about the 3,000 architects and engineers who are disproving the fallacy behind what happened on that, terrible day and tragedy where 3,000 people died in New York in the World Trade Center. So if you don't know who Richard Gage is, an architects and engineers, it's been a couple years since we've had him on the broadcast, but do check him out as well. But Bart, it's interesting that all these individuals have been involved in this, and none of them really seem to be, super proud of what they've done, obviously. And you've brought evidence, and at times it looks like you've confronted these individuals and tried to get some confessions out of them. Do you think we'll ever get a confession out of Buzz Aldrin or Neil Armstrong, that the moon landing was recorded? Because obviously, through all the evidence that you provided, like it's just very simple. It's almost laughable to think that the average human would actually believe that those were authentically recorded on the moon. And I immediately started to question it too. And then when I watched your documentary, and read your book, I was like, boy, this all makes sense. Like there's a lot going on. The government wants to divert funds towards something or pocket the money. Who knows what it went towards? Maybe they all are driving nice new cars, whatever it might be. But it doesn't surprise me that our government would be involved in corruption. You mentioned the Titanic. That's another thing I have questions about, especially considering it was an unsinkable ship and it got, accidentally hit an iceberg and that took it down. And, was it weeks or months prior, the Olympic went down because they hit a British warship, and some people believe they repainted it and called it the Titanic and sank it in the deepest part of the ocean for insurance fraud. Who knows? But we have all these things to unpack for our listeners out there. And I think for somebody out there that grew up like I did, believing that we walked on the moon, Mark D'Antonio, top astronomer, is a good friend of mine. He believes in the moon landing. And I was like, you got to tune into tonight's show. You got to hear this stuff. I was like, these photographs, he's a chief photo analyst at MUFON. He disproves UFO videos. I'm like, and so when I talk to Mark and I'm like, I don't believe that UFOs are interstellar or aliens. I think if there are UFOs, they're either government or, like you mentioned, they're interdimensional beings or demons per se. They're spiritual beings because, Aleister Crowley had his little good time with the UFO aliens per se, or what he described and painted as an alien that he said was a demon. But it's really interesting. Don, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's all, certainly a lot of information to, for me to consider personally. I'm certainly not above changing my mind on a number of things. I've told the story plenty of times here. When I first started researching 9/11 being an inside job, I did so because I didn't believe it and I was going to disprove it. And then, lo and behold, I was like, well, actually, I was wrong. They really murdered 3,000 American citizens, and the evidence is pretty damn convincing. And so, I'm certainly not above changing my mind. It certainly looks like that the whole thing was faked, and I can see the reasons why. I still personally believe that extraterrestrials do exist. I'm not that's probably one of the subjects that I've researched more than almost anything else, and we've had great guests on here talking about that. Donald Raymond Schmidt is a fantastic researcher who's spent his entire life researching the Roswell incident. And, suffice to say that throughout all the research that I have done personally and throughout all the incredible individuals we've had on this program, I would certainly say there is enough evidence, either anecdotal or direct or documents or whatever, to say that extraterrestrials probably do exist, more than likely, And,
well, I think mathematically,
if I may interject, I think they do exist also, such as UFOs. The issue, Kennedy is dead, right? Mm-hmm. But the issue is who did it. And so UFOs are real, I believe, and I believe aliens are real. But the question is, what are they and where are they really from? It's the exact opposite of what our government wants to believe. And, I think that Kristan is onto something. He's kind of the hidden nail on the head about the spiritual implications. More than, who sunk the Titanic or why. The fact is, at the time in 1912, the Titanic was the largest technological creation of mankind. It was the single biggest machine ever built by the human hand. And they had the audacity to put in print, the ship that God himself cannot sink. You see, and mankind's greatest technology until about 300 years ago was simply the tallest building. For thousands of years, the greatest technology was architecture. How tall could you build a building without it collapsing? The first is the Tower of Babel, which the Bible says was simply built to boast. Look how great we are. Never finished. Titanic never made one voyage. And then Tricky Dick Nixon, when he knew they were not on the moon, had the audacity to say putting a man on the moon is second in greatness only to the creation of the universe by God. And so there's a spiritual battle going on here. The World Economic Forum, the people who boast that they supplant world leaders and cabinet members in every government of the world. They're $1 billion organization full of billionaires that could spend $1 billion on one logo if they want to. Go look at their logo. There's an O in world, an O in economic, an O in forum, and a half circle going through all three O's, forming 666, hidden in plain sight. And their chief spokesperson says, don't obey the Bible and don't follow Jesus. Never says there's no God, never says there's no Lucifer. Now, if aliens are really fallen angels and hybrid human beings, right? The Bible says in Leviticus not to crossbreed species. It says don't make GMOs. And you know what happens when you do it anyway? When you take a horse and a donkey to get a mule, the mule is sterile. The divine creator built it in there. When you disobey, it puts it into it. It's built in. What a coincidence. GMOs were introduced 50 years ago, and the last 50 years, fertility rates have dropped 65%. By the guy who's promoting GMOs, who says he wants to lower the population by 94%. Now, if fallen angels are really the identity of aliens, during these alien abductions, they harvest sperm and eggs because they're sterile. You see, when they're half fallen angel, half human, the Nephilim are sterile. That's why they abduct sperm and eggs. And when people are going through these abductions, and they invoke the name of Jesus, they run away. If they're an alien from another world, why would the name Bob, Kristan, Don, Bart, Buddha, Jesus, what difference would it make? You see? So something is going on here. If the people who control the world have 666 in their logo, if CERN has 666 in their logo, and the Indian version of Lucifer as a statue in the center courtyard, maybe something's going on here between good and evil. The fact is that the moon landing represents the crowning achievement of mankind, the Tower of Babel. You see, never finished. It's spiritually symbolic of our fallen nature. Go ahead. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that the elite definitely believe in what's called the mystery religion. And even when we do look at, I spoke about this, I was hosting a program. I don't know if you ever heard of Alex Jones InfoWars, but I was hosting the American Journal and Alex Jones InfoWars network. And we were talking about CERN. You mentioned 666. It's also 6 and 9, which is 15, and 3, 5, and 7, which is really important to Tesla. And there's a lot of hidden symbolism, and subliminally, we don't see it a lot of times, but we're injected by it. And they believe that there's power in these symbols. They believe that there's power, like we talked about McDonald's using red and yellow because it makes shitty food look appetizing, because that's what it does. You know, your body, all of a sudden your mind gets to play the trick. It's a spell. It casts a spell on you. That's why the process of giving symbols meaning, right? It's not called wording. It's called spelling. That's why when we take those symbols and we put it to paper, it's called a rite, and there's a ritual, R-I-T-E, and rite. Our language is a very occult language. And I think it's really interesting that you brought all this up, the symbolism of these networks. CERN got fired up today because of the eclipse. They're trying to find what they call KK gravitons. KK gravitons are little mini black holes that would reverse gravity or eat gravity to make things weightless, which wouldn't surprise me that they already have this technology, and that's how they're having a lot of these like UFO sightings. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, there's interesting synthetic biology. If there was a smarter race out there, Bart, they would develop and create synthetic biological creatures that could travel through space, and then they would need things maybe like our blood or, like you mentioned, our semen to reproduce. Who knows?
Well, yeah, the book is interactive. I didn't mention that. There are 17 video clips. Like, I write a chapter and then I say, look at video clip 1, 2, whatever, so that you'll understand what I just wrote about or I'm about to write about. You can see all these for free at Sibrel.com. One of them, really the creepiest one, is this reel of footage. Back when I was a kid, TV would stop transmitting about 1 a.m. And right before they stopped until the 5 a.m. news, they would play the national anthem with like images of the Statue of Liberty and, I don't know, the Washington Monument, things like that. There's a film of that, one of the book links at Sibrel.com, that has the words of the national anthem kind of going across the bottom of the screen. And when the new verse comes up, it kind of ripples through, kind of like a Venetian blind kind of effect. it's slowed down in the presentation, and you see them actually say, government to God, consume, obey, worship the government, word for word, in a subliminal message during the national anthem that is broadcast throughout the country in, I guess, the late 60s or early 70s, whenever the 16 millimeter film was manufactured. I mean, this is really weird. This is going on. And I never thought about the word spelling. There's programming. We're literally being programmed with Star Trek to believe in aliens, to believe in space travel, because they have a plan to deceive us. And so they have this idea planted in our minds. Last time I was in a hotel, I think 3 of the 10 movies available on HBO were about aliens from outer space. I mean, if 3 of the 10 movies were about how great the president is, or 3 of the 10 were about how terrible the president is, you could see someone trying to propagandize you. But 3 of 10 movies about aliens, they really want us to believe in aliens. And the fact is, radio telescopes have been pointing in every direction of the universe for 50 years, and the only radio signal in the universe is coming from Earth. What if the truth is exactly the opposite of what the government wants us to believe, which is we're it. This is it. And there's a lot of people, scientists, who are beginning to understand that actually life is not plentiful in the universe. It shouldn't even be here. That mathematically you can actually prove through DNA and atoms and electrons divine creation, whether you understand it or not. You know, my dog probably understands the car is inanimate, unlike, you know, maybe a cat or another dog. It probably even understands that I direct the car. But if I spend its whole life trying to explain the starter and, you know, engine under the hood, or even just a spark plug, it'll never comprehend it. But just because it can't comprehend it doesn't mean it's not designed. An arrogant man believes if he can't comprehend an eternal being and divine creation and Messiah, it must not be true. Well, not necessarily. Things don't make themselves. You see, you can't have a flower and a bee evolving with 100% dependence on each other. There's something above it. Evolution is actually the exact opposite of logic. It says a lower form created a higher form. Something without a brain made a brain. You see that? And then the latest program, Ancient Aliens, is admitting the Bible is true, because they did a study about 20 years ago where they took blood samples from every nationality on Earth, from Eskimos and Swedes and Africans. They traced it back in time, and they said absolutely scientifically, every human came from one woman. Every human who ever lived, is alive today, or will ever live, came from one woman, just like the Bible says, and no one before her. So the world leaders don't want us to believe in God. So they said we're made by aliens. Well, if aliens are really fallen angels and their leader is Lucifer, what they're really saying is we were made by Lucifer instead of God. And that's what the book of Isaiah says in the 14th chapter, that Lucifer wanted to ascend to the throne of God. You see that? And 666 is in these people's logo. These people are smart who run the world. They may be evil, but they're smart. Would they worship something that didn't exist? Would they worship Santa Claus? I think they're worshiping something that does exist. And they don't want us to perceive this. You see, that's why there's TV programming, and people spend 40 hours a week at work and 40 hours a week watching television. You see, while we could make the world a better place and get rid of these scoundrels who are trying to literally kill us all, I don't think there's enough hours in the day with that much TV watching left over to do it. What do you think?
Well, Bart, first thing I got to ask you, you worked in media for a minute. Have you ever heard of a place called Bohemian Grove?
Yeah, I have. Thanks to Alex Jones.
Well, okay. So Alex Jones broke the door wide open, but it was exposed even back in the 70s and 80s. There's, people trying to infiltrate it. And, now there's like Kid Rock, and everyone's talking about where they do a mock child sacrifice, cremation of care to Minerva, which is also a moon goddess, or Semiramis, which is Nimrod's mother and wife. And as we know, she's also known as the Statue of Liberty. The Medal of Honor website lists that the Statue of Liberty was made in Semiramis' figure and of her lookalike, because she built the Tower of Babel, and she was also known as the Lady on the Moon and Mother Earth. But she was also known in the biblical sense as the Whore of Babylon, because she married her son Nimrod, and also reproduced with his phallus after he died, right? His phallus was saved and it was brought to Semiramis. His body was cut in 14 parts by Abraham. And then Tammuz, his son, was born on December 25th. So what's interesting here is that he became the first sun deity. And today we talked about the eclipse a lot, and why kings wear a crown. The crown represents the sun and the rays, because the king is supposed to illuminate those around him. Well, they believe in this occult. That, I mean, you've heard the phrases, the sun and the moon and their 1,000 points of light. Well, that's a reference back to Nimrod, and Nimrod may be the first Lucifer, or sun-bearing deity, or person who was deified as a sun god. But it might have started before that, because that was post-flood, if you look at the biblical sense. And I'm very interested in the Bible because in Wisconsin, they found giant human skeletons. And it was interesting to me because I went to the Archaeological Society in Madison and started digging up some of these credible scientists who were involved in these findings of indigenous effigy mounds of humans between 9 and 18 feet tall. And so I started looking in the Library of Congress, and I found thousands of newspaper articles of these finds all across America. And the only real references I could find to giants was the folklore and then the Bible, which talked about these giants.
Yeah, Genesis chapter 6 says that the sons of God, Elohim, interbred with the daughters of men. Up until about 150 years ago, and during Jesus's time and before, they took that to mean what it says, that fallen angels interbred with humans and created a deformed race of giants. It was about 150 years ago they changed that theology to mean something other than what it says. The fact is, the book of Job is older than the book of Genesis, and the first word of Elohim, sons of God, in Job, which sets the precedent, is angels. So that's what it means in Genesis, whether we find it difficult to accept or not. And then it says they became men of renown. That means world leaders. Nimrod's bed was discovered. It's 13 feet in length. He was a giant when he's depicted in carvings. He's large and everyone else is small. When you're big and everyone else is small, you rule the world. And then, thanks to this high school student about 10 years ago, for one of her projects, she went through about 500,000 genealogical names associated with presidents of the United States. And of all the presidents, they're all blood related except one. You see, Genesis 3:15 says there will be a war between the seed of Adam, seed means future offspring, and the seed of fallen angel Lucifer. You see, why are they trying to get rid of 94% of the population? Because we outnumber them. Why are all the presidents of the same bloodline? They want the most popular person to win. Bloodline Lucifer 1 or bloodline Lucifer 2. Vote, because we want the most popular person leading. You see, it's not a coincidence. This is the way that it is, whether we accept it or not. The issue is what's going to happen. New World Order, while it does mean Bilderberg Group and World Economic Forum and Illuminati and all that, technically, by definition, it simply means a new order, a new number one, which means they have to take down the current number one, which economically, militarily is the United States. So I suspect the U.S. is about to be taken down by a self-inflicted wound. I mean, that's the CIA's modus operandi. Kennedy is a self-inflicted wound. 9/11, self-inflicted wound. You see, this little thing for the last 3 years, one of the vice presidents of the company selling the medicine that people are taking, even though they're not sick, he says, this is nefarious. And so maybe they'll admit the moon landings are fake to crash the dollar, crash the stock market, bring down number one. I don't know what their plan is. That could be it.
You definitely should speak to my homie, L.A. Marzulli. You guys would get along real well. He's done a lot of research in these Paraka skulls and giant human skeletons, and what you would describe as the Raphaim or the Nephilim per se. And a lot of people don't know that in the books of Enoch, it talks about a war in the heavens, or if we'd probably call it space now, because we're well known. And that in this war in space, Lucifer lost and was thrown his planet, or came and colonized this planet. And later the winning team, call it God, came and took this planet away from him and gave it to Enoch per se. And Enoch was a man who then went into the sky and left the planet to learn the ways of the gods and cutting of roots and makeup and metallurgy and all that jazz. And he came back and taught man. And it was very interesting, the history allegedly in these ancient books through theology. And
those books were originally in the Bible,
and they were taken out.
The church that started out pure and became corrupt pretty quickly.
Council of Nicaea, Don talks about that.
They removed them from the Bible, I believe, to hide their identity. And there's a lot of symbolism in the Bible with numbers: 40 weeks in the womb and 40 years in the desert. The number 7 being the number of God. Right now, I think there are 66 books in the Bible. It's not a symbolic number, but it's really close to 70. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles were originally one book. So that means that would be 63 books. So there's a missing 7 books. Probably Enoch, Jasher, Jubilee, the War Scrolls, because they go into really detail about fallen angels and them monkeying around with crossbreeding animals and people. And the book of Revelation, time may be simultaneous. Like in some realm, Kennedy may be shot again, or tomorrow or yesterday. I don't know. Revelation 12:1 is so profound. It says there was war in heaven, and that 1/3 of the angels followed Lucifer, and they were cast down to the earth, and they're full of fury because they know their time is short. They're eternal now and are about to be exterminated at some point in the future, and they know it, and they're taking it out on mankind. And then Revelation 18:23 says in the last days there will be a significantly lower population. It uses poetic words. It says there won't be weddings, there won't be gaiety, there won't be parties because of so few people left. And then they say the reason why. They use sorcery. Well, the New Testament was actually written in Aramaic, not Greek, translated into Greek and then English and from there. But Revelation was written in Greek originally. And the word for sorcery is pharmacology. So it's saying in the last days, because of pharmacology, there will be a dramatic reduction in the number of people on the earth. And that may already be well underway and unstoppable because of the last little 3-year scenario. Fear. Do you realize do not fear is in the Bible more than any other commandment? 365 times, one for every day.
Well, that's because fear is a liar. Fear is a liar.
That's right. Why did people take a medicine for an illness they didn't even have? Because of fear of dying, and the fear may cause their death. You see that? What can you do? It is the way that it is. In fact, Jesus warned it'll get so bad in the last days that unless God personally intervenes, everyone will be killed. So I take that to mean that the evil people are going to win. They killed Kennedy, did a great job, faked the moon landing, did 9/11, did this thing for the last 3 years, and they're just getting better and better and better. And what can we do? Save ourselves from this corrupt generation. Be like the gentleman who I witnessed the moon landing fraud. Just confess our sin and recant it. Try not to do it again. And God is full of grace and love, and we'll live forever, and the scoundrels will not. What good is it to gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? And all these people, they're gain the world all right, but they won't be there on the other side. That God is not going to let evil people live forever. And this idea of hell, technically, is a little inaccurate. Otherwise, people in hell will have eternal life. It says that God so loved the world that all who follow him will have eternal life and not perish. Okay? So after judgment, you either perish or you live forever. If you're in hell going, oh, what an idiot, if I only lived differently, you also have eternal life. But it doesn't say that. you perish. You're destroyed. You're stepped on. It's over. God isn't going to torture people. That's not who he is. But he will eliminate the wicked people forever, and everyone else will live forever. So I feel sorry. I don't hate the wicked people who run the world. We're all wicked. And Jesus said, love your enemy, right? The Jews are bombing the Muslims are bombing the Jews, and the so-called Christians are bombing everybody else from America, right? No one is loving their enemy, right? So that's the key. We can't, over a PA system, yell at the people going to the World Economic Forum Bilderberg meetings. We need to pray for them. We need to pray that one of them will come forward and give glory to God and confess the schemes of the evil people. David, King David, a man after God's own heart, it only says that about David in the whole Bible. He committed adultery, killed the husband to cover it up, and he repented and will likely be on the good side of judgment. So the guy who saw the moon landing fraud saw this. He confessed his murder. He recanted of it, and he'll probably make it because of it. It's pretty simple. Just confess. And that's what one of these astronauts needs to do. If only one of them faked the moon landing, maybe they would have come forward by now. But now he'll be ruining the reputation of everybody else. Maybe he feels he'll ruin the reputation of America. However, the truth came out about the Tower of Babel. The truth came out about the Titanic. And maybe there's a reason spiritually for the truth to be delayed about coming out about the moon landing fraud. Imagine a couple who madly in love, they get married, and a few weeks into it, one of them at a convention gets super drunk, has an affair. They could either tell their spouse, the next day, or what if they told them on their 50th anniversary, which would be more shocking? Maybe the shocking part of it coming out after decades of belief, decades of defending it. People who say, even if an astronaut confessed that the moon landings are fake, they still think they walked on the moon anyway. That's from a professor teaching aerospace at college. Says there's nothing that would make him recant. Pride needs to be addressed. God addressed it with the Tower of Babel. He addressed it with the Titanic, and I believe he will address it about the moon landing fraud. And like I said, if you want to hear about this, just go to Sibrel.com. Lots of free videos on the homepage. My exhaustive book, 15 years in the writing, 2 years to edit, contains the deathbed confession of an eyewitness, as well as the testimony that the Apollo 1 fire was set intentionally, that our government is murdering its own people. And sad to say, it's true. And something should be done about it.
Bart, thanks for joining us today. We've run out of time, but I do want to add real quick that I talked to somebody who used to work for NASA. I used to bartend in another life while being a reporter. And he said that the reason why he quit NASA is because they pumped 100% oxygen in the Challenger. And then that's why it went up, he believed. So
that's what they did in the Apollo 1 fire. They intentionally killed those people, and as a warning to the rest of them. And that's not my opinion. It's the opinion of the dead man's widow and son, who's a 747 pilot. We have our federal government using a third of our income to deceive us and kill people to cover up their crimes, and they're still in power. I think maybe that's not a good thing. What can be done about it?
Thanks again for joining us, Bart. We'll have to have you back sometime soon. I appreciate all the knowledge that you shared with us. We're a couple of nerdy dudes who happen to get lucky and get a great listening audience, and we get to sit on radio 4 nights a week on KGRA behind Ground Zero and Clyde Lewis, and a guy named what's his name? We used to do Coast to Coast AM. John B. Wells, the Caravan to Midnight. So 2 great guys. We get to be sandwiched between them from midnight till 2 in the morning. So thank you guys for tuning into the Rundown.
Sure, I want to thank you, Kristan, and I especially want to thank Don. He said something very profound, that he was willing to be wrong. It said God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Pride is simply the unwillingness to be wrong. I'm wrong all the time, and it's a good thing to be wrong. Number 1, I'm not walking around in error. And number 2, I'm learning something new. And I like what Don said a lot. He's willing to be wrong, and we have to face facts. Our government, they're a bunch of gangster, murderers, liars, embezzlers, and they need to be stopped.
Agreed. That being said, everyone can check him out, Bart, out at Sibrel, Sibrel.com. Pick up his book. It's great. I picked up it, but you can find it on Audible. That's how a lot of the kids read their books these days. They get read to. And so make sure you check out his books on Audible. Look up Bart Sibrel. You can also go to his website, Sibrel.com. And if you guys want, his stuff is still on YouTube. They haven't pulled it, which is interesting because they've pulled just about every other informational video. So he's blessed to still have his stuff out there. Thanks again for joining us on the Rundown Live, Milwaukee's independent news and talk radio. I'd love to hear more from you in the future, Bart. Thanks again. And maybe I'll reach out to you. If I host a lot of broadcasts, and there's always a lot, I fill in for a lot of people, and it's always interesting to get other viewpoints. So I really appreciate you making the time for us here at the Rundown Live. Stay blessed, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
And you guys have a good night. Check out the Rundown Live. We'll be back tomorrow. Same bad time, same bad channel. KGRA, midnight till 2 in the morning. I'm your host, Kristan T. Harris. Don Vi Jr. riding shotgun. We'll see you guys soon.
You're listening to the Destroyers of Fake News, Kristan T. Harris and Don Vi Jr. on the Rundown Live. Your forecast into the future.